second series on that, critiquing Dr. Boyce Watkins' paper and talking about solutions to the problem, which is something that we do. Omar, I want to go to you first again because this is particular. Parenting classes. In terms of what we talked about last week and what we have been talking about in general, problem in this area, is there a need for parenting classes? I want to go to you, take that first one.
You know, what we have done since integration, we have copied the parenting style of the slave master's children. And that parenting style has been toxic for us because we strayed away from our African values. And I noticed that as a foster parent, our children came in the door with all kinds of dysfunctional behaviors. And once we got them on track and they were able to go back home to their biological parents, then the same problems came up again. And that's because the problem is not with the child, the problem is with the parent. There's no effective parenting going on, which is why many of our children stray away and get into all kinds of social ills. If we went back to our own culture that we strayed away from and parented our children the way we noticed to parent our children based on what we did in Mother Africa, we can solve many of our problems today.
Yes. And thank you, Brother Omar. Akil, I want to go to you next. Dr. Boyce Watkins says, here's what he says. What we have to do is realize that this isn't the way that it has to be. There are better ways to bring our children into the world and better ways to raise them. And he's saying that the solution, in part, right here, is that we must not be afraid to ask the hard questions. And then he lists some going down the line. I'll come back to those. And we were talking outside, Akil, about our youth having been taught, not been taught, and where we are today. What about the hard questions?
Yeah, the hard questions, or better yet, the hard answers.
The hard answers, okay?
The hard answers and questions go together. I think part of the problem, like Brother Baruti said, is we're following a European model, and anytime you're following that European model, it doesn't fit with an African way of thinking. It doesn't fit the African paradigm, the psychology that we use, the sociology that we use. It's all Western psychology and sociology, meaning it's following a European paradigm, meaning it's not going to have the impact on us that it would have on them. I think the key, though, for us solving some of these problems with single motherhood is that we have to understand how white supremacy is separating African American men and women from one another. There's a system in place here that does it purposely. You can use the juvenile court as an example. You can use the criminal system as an example. But these systems are in place and they separate the male from the female, leaving the mother to herself and to make decisions by herself in many cases. And so if a father is involved, then it's incumbent upon that father to train their daughter to make better choices in the end.
Okay. Much of this is redundant, I understand, but sometimes this is necessary. And this is going to go back to something we've been talking about all the time, in particular what Omar just said. He raises the question, why are people not planning their families? And when they have children, why not? If a man has 7 kids with 5 women, do we sit by, and this goes back to the hard question, do we sit by quietly as if it's not a big deal, he asked? Or do we ask, how did that happen? If a mother has 4 kids with 3 different fathers, and here he's putting it where it should be, not putting it all on the women and not putting it all on the men. He shows the 2 analogies. And then he says, how do we explain to little girls how to keep this from occurring, or are we afraid to speak up due to counterproductive political correctness? If a woman has 4 kids by 3 different men, I want to go to you, Jeffrey.
Well, I mean, I'm following right in line with Brother Akil and Brother Baruti.
All right.
That there's an absence of Afrocentricity, and when we don't have the base and the center in that mindset, we can't build strong families, and so our families become separated, due to the forces of white supremacy and racism. And it's set up like that. We've got to quit ignoring that it's set up for the purpose of destroying our families. And so if we can't recognize the problem, it's still going to be hard to solve that problem.
That reminds me of something that I haven't heard in a while. You know how these cliches come into existence. That reminds me of something like this: divide and conquer. I think that's what I'm hearing when we talk about these different. Jeffrey, you want to say something? Go right ahead.
If I can elaborate, because a lot of people start asking you questions like, well, what does racism or white supremacy have to do with this?
Okay.
So let me try to give an example, and we can take this example directly from the Willie Lynch letters, or visually from a 1970s film that was banned called Goodbye Uncle Tom. And if you have a chance to take a look at that, it'll definitely open your eyes. But you'll see towards the ending of this movie where they were actually using a African female and took her to a breeding farm full of men who were trying to get her attention. But this was an adolescent young lady, and they gave her to the strongest, most dominant male just for the purpose of bearing a child from him and keeping on that cycle of not having a relationship between the father and the mother. Once that happens, she is paid, and it's on other breeding as far as the slave owners are concerned.
Okay, you said on with the breeding. Let's bring Alan in. Alan, are you on the line?
Yes, sir. How you doing, Mr. Redd? And I see your other guests. I'm not the other guest. Your other speakers and everything.
Yeah.
I was thinking, when Dr. King said, "I have a dream," that was a single dream. And he said, "I have a dream that my kids will hold hands with little white kids and be judged by the character of their content, not the color of their skin." He said, "I." And I said, African American, we have a nightmare in the African American community. And you know about economic heaven? This is what I'm start talking now.
Okay.
Economic heaven. If God said, I give you two ways to get into heaven, all the African American people would say, how much it costs? God would say, you have to build this one. He has to become producers. That's why I said that Dr. King, even Reverend Abernathy, even a lot of the prominent civil rights leaders, they're doing pretty good. They're progressive. They have a county. They're millionaires. We have a nightmare where we always becoming consumers and saying how much it costs. We don't ask how much it costs to other people when we build it. We don't build nothing. We don't own nothing. And even Dr. King probably said, I have a dream that my little kids will work with white tellers and black tellers working together, running money. We're not going nowhere. White people are not going nowhere. And there's a lot of African American guys talking about, calling the white man the devil. It made me sick to my stomach. We always gonna have trash in our community. This is what I said. At the talented, 10% of us, if we don't start building anything, we gonna keep saying, God, how much it costs to get in the heaven? We ought to build our economic heaven and stop blaming other folks because we have two hands just like the other man.
Okay, thank you, Alan. We're going to try to tie that in with this next question. Dr. Moore said we can't possibly believe that children are better off when all siblings, and he's going to go into this jealousy question, have different fathers, find themselves jealous of one another for receiving different amounts of attention. Also, we can't pretend that the mother with several fathers has created, tying back into something that he said, healthy psychological and economic environment for our kids. Say something about that, Lana. We're talking about this whole breakup, let's call it dysfunction. And the jealousy residing within these categories, I'm gonna say. Say something about that for us, Lana.
Well, under those type of conditions, it's obvious when you just observe, you got kids growing up in an environment, mother may have 3 or 4 kids, the kids don't have the same father. Like you said, one father might actually show love to his kids, or take a kid at the home sometimes and the other kids are like, hey, where my dad at? And you know how the mother is, she might, just like a few of the fathers and take it out on the kids, and or if their relationship is not good enough, then they won't allow the kid to have that relationship with their father. And it's based on money. The father's on child support, and so with that battle right there,
It's extremely problematic, right,
it's
Lonnie?
problematic.
Yes.
But I want to say this though.
Go ahead.
That what's needed is discipline in that home. Even if the father's not there, if it's a male role model that's showing discipline in that home, I believe, it's not going to be the solution.
Mm-hmm.
But without that discipline, you're going to have chaos. That's just the bottom line. If there's no discipline, and you're going to have a male and a female in that household psychologically, because, kids are just imitators. So we imitate what we see.
Mm-hmm.
We imitate how to handle a situation. We imitate from who taught us that. So if you don't have that, a male and a female, they counter each other. So if you don't have that to how to solve a situation, a woman deals with emotion, sometimes male deal with logic, and if a male grows up emotional all the time and not dealing logically with the situation, then there go that feminization, problem.
Right. And
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the
So
feminization.
it creates a cycle of, problems. So, but I think this one, some way.
Right, we're going to get to that part about how young men do not adequately know how to deal in an environment of older men, having not had men in their lives. And then you touched on something that raises the question about the pain and the hurt, as in this question right here. Where is my dad? That creates the sadness growing up, and that takes young males into some of these other things we're going to be talking about that we've always been talking about: the crime, the drugs, the poverty. And he talks about how some of these athletes talks about being raised by their mother, having not had enough food to eat, clothes to wear, and they turn to drugs, crime, and other things, eventually sports. And he also says that it doesn't always turn out bad, but most times, I'm going to go out on them and say, most times it does turn out bad. But continuing on, the man with multiple kids by multiple women is not only going to destroy himself financially, he has spread himself so thin that it's extremely difficult, and with African American terms, what we talk about, impossible, I'm going to say, for him to be a good father to all of those children in different households, maintain his own family, provide for every one of those kids economically and emotionally. And I think you just touched on that, Jeffrey. Akil, I want to come to you.
Yeah. We were having a discussion outside.
Yes, we were.
About spreading yourself too thin.
Yes.
I could attest to that. I know from experience some things I did in my younger days, left me spread a little too thin in terms of the amount of children we have, one on top of another, on top of another. They call them stair steps. I had about 4 stairs.
Yes. Okay.
Even though I was in a marriage relationship, it was still spreading myself a little thin in terms of being able to financially provide for that amount of kids at such an early age. Not necessarily having the college education at that time to back you up in terms of getting a better job. So the thing is that you can spread yourself thin, but to have both parents in the household does make a difference.
It makes a difference.
When we talk about, Lonnie mentioned imitators, what they imitate, one of the factors I think that we haven't touched on yet is the media and how the media is used as a programming device, basically to program children to accept alternative lifestyles. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to have your father in the home. You can have another woman in the home. Mm-hmm. And that person didn't think about all the emotion that's involved with 2 women in the household, as opposed to the man with the rational, more reasonable, more logical.
Right.
I would say.
Yeah. And outside, you also said something about having not been taught. And that's why I raised the question, and I'm gonna go to Omar next. That's why I raised the question about, it appears to me that parenting classes are necessary at this point because this thing is out of hand.
Parenting
Go ahead.
classes in school, the same time they taking biology or anatomy,
Yes.
all that should go hand in hand. And if they're in schools that teach biology, then they should be teaching parenting as well.
As well.
I mean,
Because
every child, because a lot of them don't have father figures or they don't have the right home environment. So that every child should be taught that at some stage. I would say probably in that 12, 13 range. You know?
yeah, well, we've looked at the situation and our analysis tells us that at this point, this, in terms of solutions, this is something that is needed because the situation is totally out of hand. And you
Especially
mentioned,
in Memphis.
especially in Memphis, he said. Now, and you mentioned TV, which is full of foolishness and insanity. Omar, help us out here. Where does the teaching come in? You've done foster parent, you have your own children, and you said something to me the other day about push and pull. You're talking about teaching, aren't you?
You know, back in my day when I was growing up, the parent was the community. You had a mother and father in your home, in most cases, 70% or better, had a male and a female figure in the house to raise the children. And the community raised the child too. So you had plenty of parenting models all over the place. So you didn't have to go to school for it. You lived in the midst of it. But like Brother said, the media controls the minds of the people, and they glamorize having sex out of wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Sarah Palin's on her second grandchild
Mm-hmm.
out of wedlock,
Mm-hmm.
and but there are other ones like that, and they glamorize.
Oh, you mean white people do that too?
White people did it long before it became fashionable for us to do.
Oh,
They're the one pushing the agenda.
You're right. Usually it's all sex.
okay.
And
Yes.
if you look at the way they glamorize it, it's like what Brother Jeffrey said. It's like you're a stud. I have a prison ministry, and I asked the question. I said, when I come back Friday next week, I want somebody to come up here and teach what are the 3 things that make a boy into a man. Because having a baby don't get you there.
Mm-hmm.
Your sperm don't at that point. But what are the 3 things that's required? I said, give it some thought. And I'm looking for them to give me some answers because we are mistaken about what is it that makes us into men. They feel like I got a baby, so I'm a man.
Mhm.
No, you got a baby, you got some trouble if you can't handle what you just created.
Right. And the number to call if you want to get on the show, 901-327-3400 or 901-327-2500. Here's something, next question. It's sort of long, but I find it important. How do we keep our relationships together? Some of our relationships have become like rocket boosters on a NASA spaceship. When a NASA rocket is launched in a big violent explosion, the boosters eventually detach and are thrown into the ocean. They are only used to launch the rocket into orbit, and new boosters are typically built for every new launch. Sometimes it seems like that fathers are used in that same way. Check this out. The baby daddy is used to create the explosive passion necessary to create a life. Then once the relationship has progressed beyond that point of uselessness, the father is dumped into the ocean of men, possibly recycled, but typically never to be used again. Then another man comes to take the first man's place. When it's time to create another child, in the end, the kids suffer the most. Jeffrey. Go ahead. Break it down.
Just to elaborate a little bit on that,
Okay, Lonnie,
come back.
work on it and come back to you.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to pass, we'll go to Akil and then we'll put some thought to it. We'll come back. We're a team. We're a team here.
I had a thought, but it slipped my mind.
It happens. We're human beings.
But I still think it goes back to what he was saying about, how they used to use us as breeders, right?
Okay.
And now, how if you believe in the wilderness letter or not, when the woman was they reverse the roles of the male and the female, right? Instead of this, according to the legislator,